Okay guys, so I filmed this video in the summer of 2015, and now looking back at it in the spring of 2022, if you have found this video, you most likely own or are perhaps considering the purchase of an approximately 99 to 2004-ish Ford Super Duty like this one here. Alright, so here's the deal. So what happened is when I got this truck, I noticed that you know, it doesn't drive like most vehicles. You kind of have to herd the thing down the road. You steer a little to the left and it wanders, and then you steer a little to the right. And yeah, that's just how it is. Okay, so I took it to a somewhat local mechanic shop, and he said, "Oh yeah, you need all these many things, blah blah blah." So it cost me like $1,500. That was back about 2014 when I first bought the truck, a year or so before we filmed this video. And I got it back. It drove pretty much exactly the same. So I had a buddy look at it, and he's like, well, just hop in there and turn the steering wheel. And he noticed that the shaft going into the gearbox was moving left and right as I turned the wheel, but nothing was actually moving out of the gearbox. So he took a look at it in 10 seconds. He's like, yeah, well, all you need is a new steering box. All right, great, you know. So the first thing I'm going to tell you guys, you younger viewers, yes, obviously I'm kind of jaded, but you can't just hire things out. I mean, look, it's not the 1950s anymore, okay? The days where you can just take a vehicle to any old mechanic or to the dealership or whatever and just trust them and go with whatever they go with, yeah, you can't do stuff like that anymore. Basically, the way that this economy is set up is everything is inherently predatory. There's no sense of value. The only thing that matters is how much can we just rape out of this customer while providing the bare minimum in return. And, you know, that shop was either incompetent or they're like, well, you know, we'll just sell this guy $1,500 of, you know, front end work or whatever that he doesn't need. And then when that doesn't fix it, we'll sell him the correct thing later. Yeah, that's just how it goes. I don't hire things out anymore. The only way you can do that is if you have like a dedicated family mechanic or, you know, like a friend you've known for years who's really good at working on stuff. I mean, outside of those types of things, like I said, I don't hire stuff like that out anymore. You just can't. Everything's too dysfunctional. Everything's too predatory. Okay, yeah, I mean, I know it's negative, but I wish somebody told me this stuff. Now for the positive. The steering box helped a lot. So at the end of this video, watch it. I was all super excited. It's kind of like when you change the oil in a vehicle and you're like, oh, wow, the engine runs 50 times smoother. Okay, you know, yeah, maybe it does sound a little different, but it's not 50 times smoother. All right, but that's kind of the mood that I was in. And it was a major improvement over the slopped out old gearbox that was in it. But I got to be honest with you guys, these things don't drive like the new ones. They don't drive like the F-150s, okay? I've driven the Jelly Bean style, like 1990s to early 2000s F-150s, and I've driven the later ones. I think they call them the 12th gens, like the 06 and 08 and stuff. Driven those. Yeah, it doesn't drive like either of those. It's not going to. It steers a lot more like a truck, and to some extent, you will always have to kind of herd it a little to the left and then herd it a little bit to the right when you're going down. It's just the way it is. All right, the other thing about these trucks, they're honestly very good vehicles. I really wish that Ford had not named the engine the Triton that they put in these, but other than that, they're actually very good vehicles. I'm going to throw this in here for free. One of the other major problems with these, you should know if you're looking at buying one or keeping one, is the AC systems just weren't built properly and they don't work right. That's just all there is to it. A good friend of mine, one of the mechanics I know, owns a truck of this generation. A few summers back, he's like, I really want the AC to work in this thing because I drive it all over creation. So he spends, you know, hundreds of dollars and lots of hours of his own time. He goes through, he replaces a whole bunch of stuff. When he's done with all that, the AC works, you know, pretty much the same as it did before. That's how it was on mine. You know, he was talking to me about it. It's like, so did I mess this up or did they just not work on these trucks? I was like, yeah, mine never really did anything either. Okay, that's just how they are. But here's the deal, okay? They're very reliable. My truck always started. I sold it about 2.5 years after we filmed this repair, by the way. It was very reliable. It just plain works. That's all you really need, especially as the economy is falling apart out there. You know, and the average age of a vehicle on the road is only going to increase for the foreseeable future. You know, it's reliable. It gets the job done. These trucks are very stout. And I can tell you guys, after I swapped out the steering gearbox, and we gave it helper springs on all 4 wheels because it's a leaf spring deal all the way around, which is kind of nice, very strong. After we did that and put new shocks on also all 4 wheels, this thing honestly drove pretty dang well. You know, it did. People frown on spending all this money on an older vehicle. Look, you know, what's the alternative? $600-800 a month for truck payments, or you drive something that feels like it's, you know, totally slopped out and destroyed. Yeah, you know, this redhead steering gearbox, I don't know what these cost nowadays. Obviously, I haven't looked them up, but yeah, I feel like this was a worthwhile upgrade. But I gotta be honest with you guys, it's not gonna be perfect, okay? But man, it was like 10 times better. Okay, so there's that. Also, you know, guys, this was filmed in 2015. Okay, I don't know why I put my channel name in the, you know, in the title that runs like all the way through this. I have no idea why I did that. All right, you know, it was YouTube especially was a different place back then. Like the other thing that's in here that's kind of weird is a lot of us at the time we'd get like royalty-free music, which was a pretty new thing back then, and we'd like put the title and the artist and everything in the video. Yeah, it's just I don't know. Okay, it's a different place, older video, but anyway. Hopefully this helps you, and thanks for watching over all these years. Enjoy the repair.
I've heard nothing but good things about these boxes, so I didn't really mind shelling out for it because this truck is a really problem-free vehicle for me. So when it does need something, I don't mind splurging a little bit. So once I had it unboxed, I just took the seat belt and I ran it through the steering wheel so this thing doesn't, you know, spin somehow and end up all cattywampus in relation to the gearbox itself. Then I went ahead and I set the parking brake on the truck and I tossed this chalk underneath the rear wheel with the help of the shop mutt here. And then I just went ahead and unhooked the battery. Mine took an 8mm wrench. And I understand you can potentially screw up some of the airbag sensors if you let that wheel spin or you don't disconnect the battery or something. So I went ahead and did this. I pretty much just followed this part, at least out of that Haynes manual. And then I took my keys and I put them in the ignition. I set them to the run position to unlock the steering wheel. And again, that was out of the manual. And I felt like we were pretty good there, so then I took my oil change pan, I set it up about underneath the front axle, a little bit ahead of that, and then I glanced down through here. You can see in front of the steering box, you can actually see the pan under there, and I just wanted to do that to make sure it was pretty close in the right position. And then I set about loosening these two lines here for the power steering fluid from the pump. Mine took a 5/8 wrench and there's a little bit of slip. It was a little bit too large to use my 15mm wrench on, and I don't have a 16mm wrench, but that would probably work here, probably a little bit better than the 5/8 did. But I used a 5/8 and it wasn't that bad because these things aren't on there very tight. And so I just loosened them with the wrench and I removed them with my fingers, and then the one line kind of stuck in there a little bit. I did have to kind of yank it out, but the bolt at least wasn't that hard to remove, which is good. So then all this dirty old fluid started pouring out of here, which is good. I have no idea how long that's been in here. And yeah, so once that was done, I just took my floor jack and I started jacking up the truck. Now the reason for this is we're about to remove a front wheel so we can get to the bolts that hold this box in place. And I just removed the remaining lug nuts, got a couple extra on here because we got the Super Duty truck, of course. And then I just wrestled the tire off and set it aside for future use. Alright, so now I'm going to remove this cotter pin, which goes to the steering arm, which goes to the pitman arm. Now you can use vice grip pliers for this. I used a fence tool because I felt like that gave me a pretty good grip on the cotter pin, and also because I'm somewhat of a redneck. And then I just got under there with my 21mm wrench, and I just removed the castle nut. This might look a little bit overwhelming, but it was actually a really simple process. There weren't really any videos on YouTube of this that I could reference just to see what I'd be getting myself into if I was gonna do this myself, and so that's kind of why I wanted to make one for you guys. So once I had that nut off, I used my industrial strength pickle fork here to kind of pop the tie rod out from the bottom of that pitman arm. And it just came crashing out. Mine came out really easily because I did have most of a new front end put under this truck last summer. More on that in a little while.
Oh, you guys are some worried mutts. Hi. You God, don't lick me. I'm alarmed.
So once I assured those nice puppies that everything was okay, I just went ahead and removed the bolt from the linkage that runs into the back of the steering box. I thought I had a better shot of this where you guys could actually see this, but you'll see it in a moment here. However, you'll know what it is. There's one bolt that goes from the linkage on the back of the steering pump here. You can kind of see it right here. It's right behind those fittings. And that's just what holds the steering shaft onto the back of the steering box. You just remove the one bolt. You can see the hole for it right there, and then you slide that off the back of the box, and just like that, it is no longer attached to your steering wheel. So the next thing I did, now that we have the wheel removed, is I got my 14mm socket and I went ahead and removed the 3 bolts that actually run through the frame and hold this box in place. Now these can be a little bit of a trick to remove. My truck, since it's sort of it's always been in Texas, it's not too rusty, but there was a surprising amount of rust on some of these bolts, like inside the frame. And they're also held in place with some thread lock inside the original steering box here, as you'll see in a moment. But the little impact wrench had no problem busting these things loose, and I just ripped them out of there. We got rust, dust flying through the air, landing on that leaf spring and everything. But yeah, these came out pretty easily, which I was glad about. And these are the last component that holds the steering box in place. So after this, I pretty much just climbed underneath the truck, and you got to be careful that you don't drop this thing on yourself. It probably weighs about 30-40 pounds or so, and there's not really anything holding it up in there. And as my buddy Wes would say, there's really nothing to it but to do it. And I just grabbed the thing and got it out, and there it is. Just like that.
Ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, I present to you rule number 1. Rule number 1, as you may know, never fails and it always holds true. And rule number 1 is that everything, literally everything, it does not matter what it is or what you're doing, it will cost more than you expected, and it will take longer than expected, and usually it will involve more headaches than expected. Prime example of rule number 1 right here. So we got this pitman arm thing, and this pitman arm is on there. I have spent probably the last 2 hours screwing with this thing. I've broken 2 pullers so far. Now, to be honest, these weren't the world's most inspiring pullers in the first place, but they're good and broken now. And so yeah, we got that. I went back to the auto parts place and I bought this puller, but as you can see, the problem with this is that the awesomeness of my truck is just too awesome for this puller, and so it doesn't fit over the doohickey here. So, you know, that kind of sucks. And now I'm stuck with this thing, which is like 22 bucks. Obviously can't take it back now because it's soaked in this transmission oil. And the package it came in is soaked in transmission oil, and everything is soaked in transmission oil. I will put money down there's more of this crap on my floor than in the pan. And for once in my life, I actually properly positioned an oil catch pan, which I'm pretty proud of, or at least I was. So this is what we got. Also, I'm especially glad that I'm changing this out because every time I move this thing, it makes these noises. And that stuff falls out, and as you can see, it doesn't even look like automatic transmission fluid or power steering fluid. It looks like liquid JB Weld, and it's all like gray and metallic and nasty. So yeah, it's probably really for the best that I'm getting rid of this, because who knows what else is floating around in the bottom of that thing. So where I'm going with this is I have tried every method known to man and several known to monkey to try and remove this stupid thingamajig from the doohickey here, and gotten absolutely nowhere. So I finally broke down. I called the auto parts place and I ordered a Moog brand pitman arm, which they say will be there first thing in the morning, 9 a.m. or so they say. Now, funny story about Moog stuff. This truck has a new front end under it, or at least it did. Yeah, it's still under there, we're good. Anyway, yeah, when I got this truck, as soon as I started driving it on the road, the first thing I noticed was, oh, this thing's got like a solid 20 degrees of play in the steering. I should do something about this. So I took it to a local mechanic shop close to where I used to live in Austin. And the mechanic took a look at it and he's like, oh, this thing needs new tie rods and new ball joints. And $1,500 later, that was done. And the truck drove exactly the same as it did before I had that done. So I was telling a buddy of mine about this, and he was mechanically inclined. He's like, let's just take a look at this thing. And that's when we noticed that you can wiggle the steering wheel back and forth, and you see the shaft wiggle going into the steering box, and nothing wiggles coming out the steering box. And that was when I realized that my buddy was a better mechanic than the mechanic who mechanicked on my truck. So
that was a long rambling story, but yeah, I got a Moog pitman arm coming in. And honestly, it's probably for the best because I understand that this surface in here can kind of wear out over time. And this front end has a lot of wear on it. So, you know, I am pretty glad about that. However, rule number 1 has held true. Definitely took longer than expected and cost 51 bucks for the arm and 20 something for the puller more than expected. So, you know, what can you do? Alright, so you're watching part 2 of the steering box install, and I picked up the pitman arm first thing this morning. It arrived exactly on time, which I thought was really cool. And then I positioned it on the steering box the same way the old one was positioned on the old steering box, and I just tightened that nut down. And then I began the process of placing this complete assembly up underneath the inside of the truck here. Now, this isn't a part of the project I was particularly looking forward to because this thing does have some good weight to it. You know, as mentioned, it probably weighs about 30-40 pounds or so, but it honestly wasn't all that bad, and you know, there's really nothing to it but to do it as they say. And I just got this thing secured up in there so it wouldn't fall back down on me. And then I just reached around to the other side and started replacing those 3 bolts and tightening them down, for now at least, with the impact wrench. So at this point, pretty much all we have to do is put together everything else that we messed with to get that steering box out of there. Now, the tie rod no longer lines completely up with the end of the pitman arm, but luckily I had enough leverage on the box through the end of that pitman arm that I could just kind of grab it and move it to the side an inch or two. And then I installed this tie rod. And then I just took the castle nut and I started threading it down on there. I got it finger tight, and then I cranked down on it somewhat, not too much, with my 21mm wrench. And from there, it became time to replace the cotter pin. Now, as y'all probably know about me, I'm not a mechanic in any way, shape, or form. But I will say it's probably not that good of an idea to go ahead and try and reuse the old cotter pins. You know, you get a big bag of replacements for like $1.50 or whatever. So I put one of those in, and then I started removing these plastic caps that are presumably just on the box to keep dust and dirt and that sort of thing from the inside of the unit as it's getting moved and installed and whatever. And once I had these things out of there, the next thing to do was to start the process of putting the fluid lines back in place. And I pretty much just got these lined up, and then I started getting them finger tight and just took it from there. Now, I want to start getting these threaded before I use a wrench, because if I cross thread them, like I just put it on there a little bit until it barely moves and it's finger tight, and then I put a wrench on that, I can strip a thread out or damage one, and I would really prefer not to do that. Alright, I'm only going to get these snug. I don't want to like bear down on them. So the next thing I did is I just went ahead and repositioned the linkage that runs from the steering wheel to the steering box. You can see it right here over the shaft. It's coming out the back of the steering box. Now, it's worth noting that on my particular truck at least, the shaft on the back of the steering box looks just like this right here, and it does have a flat spot on it, and unfortunately the way I had the steering wheel didn't perfectly line up with the back of the shaft. So what I had to do is just, you know, put my key in the steering column and set the vehicle to the run position so I could wiggle it around much. It really didn't take a whole lot, and I didn't mess with it from the steering wheel side of the linkage. I just grabbed the linkage, you know, under the hood, and I twisted it as necessary so it fit over the back of the shaft. And just like that, it pretty much slid right into place. It, you know, I had to wiggle it around a little bit and use some force, but it was nothing that was all that difficult, and I just did it with my bare hands in it. I like to think it worked out pretty well. Alright, so I gave it a few good taps with the hammer. Actually, you know, I don't think this is the kind of thing you want to hit very hard. I literally just tapped it. And actually, if I was using a larger hammer, I probably just would have used the handle on the hammer instead of the metal part. And I pushed it right up in there, so it's not going to go forward anymore. And now let's have a look at this bolt. As you can probably see, it's got some sort of thread locker on it. So I think I'm just going to use some more thread locker. It's got that blue stuff, and I got some blue Loctite, so that's what I'm going to use. So once I applied the thread locker, I just pretty much positioned the bolt how it's supposed to go. I got it finger tight, and then I just used my ratchet here and just got it all nice and snug. Now, I did get this fairly tight, but it was nowhere close to the point of stripping out threads and so on and so forth.
YouTube, is it overfill? Is it overfill? Oh, it's close. It's about to boil over, everybody. Need to go. This is too loud for you. I don't want to deafen any puppies. Go. Go be a dog outside. Good dog.
So while I was at it with the Loctite, I figured I might as well secure into place these 3 main bolts that hold the steering box to the frame rail of the truck. So I just popped them out with the impact. I applied some of that blue Loctite to them, and then I just once again went ahead and secured them in place. Now at this point, normally what I'd go ahead and do is replace the front wheel that we removed earlier so we had access to those bolts. But since I had to do a tire rotation on this beast anyway, I figured now is a pretty good time to do that. So with the power of that nice little cordless impact wrench, I just removed all these tires one at a time and rotated them and got things how they are supposed to go. Now next up, we're going to be talking about bleeding the power steering system. Now this steering box had this message in the box with it, and since the redhead folks are the ones that put that box together, I figured I'd probably take their advice on this. But I'm sure this is one of those things where there's probably 10 different ways to do it, and most of them work just fine. This method is different than the method that's listed in that Haynes manual that I referenced earlier, but this is what I did, and I had pretty good luck with it. So I guess pretty much all we have to do now is go ahead and start adding some power steering fluid to our reservoir here, and basically just take it from there. So once I had the reservoir filled up, I just took my keys, I put them in the ignition to unlock the steering wheel, and then I started turning this all the way to the left, and then all the way to the right, and all the way to the left, and back and forth for about 20 times here. And that piece of paper that we got recommends waiting at least 2 hours. They say that if you let the truck sit overnight, you might get better results, but I literally just did the bare minimum 2 hours because I was kind of in a hurry here and things were fine. And then once that 2 hours was up, I basically just again topped off the fluid using the dipstick, of course, and then I spun the wheel all the way to the left and then back to the right about 10 different times. And it felt a lot different than it did before. I looked in the reservoir and I could see where the murky fluid from inside of the power steering pump was mixing with the fresh fluid that we just poured in earlier, but overall I think it's still going to look a lot better than some of the crap that came out that old steering box. And yeah, so from here I pretty much just reconnected the battery, made one more check of the fluid. I guess the main thing we're trying to avoid here is letting air get sucked into the system. And then it was finally time for a road test. Now I actually did start off slow around the neighborhood, and from there I started driving out to the local UPS store because I got to return this core, and the truck drove great. What you're seeing right here is about the only problem that we had. The wheel doesn't sit perfectly straight. As you can see, it's kind of all cattywampus like, but the truck does drive like a new one. I'm going to say the steering on this feels at least as good, if not slightly better, than the steering in my 2013 F-150. It returns to straight really well. It just feels tight and it feels firm and it feels exactly how a truck steering should. And so I'm completely thrilled with this. Now the problem with the wheel is likely caused by this thing right here that's referred to as the drag link. I read up on this in like 30 seconds at a gas station just on Google. And evidently there's a chance that pitman arm isn't exactly the same length as the old one, or some little minor detail is screwing with things somewhere. And basically all I have to do is loosen that and it will expand that arm, and that will adjust where the pitman arm sits, and that will push the steering wheel back to straight. And I would have done that in this video, but I didn't really want to because this video is already getting kind of long. But regardless, the truck drives like a dream. There is zero play in it. Everything just feels phenomenal. I'm completely satisfied with this box. It feels so much better than the cheap box in my old Silverado, but that's only so much of a fair comparison. I definitely think this box is worth the money. and I'm glad it's in here, and I'm pretty thrilled with the way this turned out. So I hope this video has helped you if you're thinking about having a repair like this done, and as always, have fun and stay safe. Yeehaw.